The morning mist clung to Lake Erie like a shroud, and through its ghostly veil, the silhouettes of warships emerged like phantoms from another world. It was the 10th of September, 1813, and the fate of a young nation hung in the balance upon these freshwater waves. The War of 1812 had raged for over a year, and the Great Lakes had become the crucial theater where America's destiny would be determined. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry stood on the quarterdeck of his flagship, the Lawrence, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he surveyed the approaching British squadron. At 28 years old, Perry carried the weight of American hopes on his shoulders. The British had controlled Lake Erie since the war began, their naval supremacy strangling American supply lines and leaving the Northwestern Territories vulnerable to attack. But today, everything would change. The young Commodore's fleet consisted of 9 vessels, a motley collection of ships hastily constructed in the shipyards of Erie, Pennsylvania. His flagship Lawrence, named after the fallen hero Captain James Lawrence, bore the inspiring words, "Don't give up," the ship emblazoned across her battle flag. Beside her sailed the Niagara, commanded by Captain Jesse Duncan Elliott, along with 7 smaller vessels including the Ariel, Caledonia, and Somers. Each ship carried the dreams of a nation fighting for its independence. Across the water, the British squadron under Captain Robert Heriot Barclay approached with cold precision. The British had ruled the seas for generations, their naval tradition stretching back centuries. Barclay's flagship, the Detroit, led 5 other vessels including the Queen Charlotte, Lady Prevost, and the smaller Hunter, Little Belt, and Chippewa. Though outnumbered, the British possessed superior firepower and experience, their cannons having tasted victory in countless battles across the world's oceans. The strategic importance of this confrontation could not be overstated. Control of Lake Erie meant control of the entire Great Lakes region, determining whether American forces could maintain their positions in the Northwest Territory or be forced to retreat. The British had established a formidable presence at Fort Malden, using their naval superiority to supply their forces and coordinate attacks with their Native American allies. Under the leadership of the legendary Tecumseh, according to historical accounts documented by the American Battlefield Trust, the British supply lines had been severely disrupted earlier in the year, when American forces under General Zebulon Pike had attacked and burned York, Canada. This forced the British to rely on longer, more vulnerable supply routes, making their naval control of Lake Erie even more crucial for maintaining their hold on the region. Perry had spent months preparing for this moment, overseeing the construction of his fleet despite numerous obstacles. The shipyards at Erie had worked tirelessly through the winter, craftsmen and sailors laboring to build vessels that could match British naval power. Skilled shipwrights had been recruited from across the eastern seaboard, and cannons had been transported overland through treacherous terrain to arm the new vessels. As the 2 fleets maneuvered into position, the tension was palpable. Sailors checked their weapons, gunners prepared their cannons, and officers studied the wind patterns that would determine their tactical advantages. The lake stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface broken only by the occasional whitecap driven by the morning breeze. Both commanders knew that this battle would determine not just control of the lake, but the entire course of the war in the Northwest. The British approach was methodical and professional, their ships maintaining perfect formation as they closed the distance. Captain Barclay, despite suffering from wounds received in previous battles, commanded with the confidence of a veteran officer who had served under Lord Nelson himself. His crews were experienced, disciplined, and had never known defeat on the water. But Perry's Americans possessed something the British had not encountered before, a desperate determination born of fighting for their homeland. These were not professional sailors fighting for king and country, but citizens defending their new nation's right to exist. As the flagship Lawrence prepared for battle, Perry gathered his officers around him, his voice carrying across the deck as he reminded them of the stakes they faced and the glory that awaited those brave enough to seize it. The first shot rang out across Lake Erie at 11:55 in the morning, shattering the peaceful silence and announcing the beginning of what would become one of the most significant naval battles in American history. The British long guns roared to life, their superior range allowing them to rake the American line before Perry's fleet could respond. Effectively, the Detroit and Queen Charlotte concentrated their fire on the Lawrence, recognizing Perry's flagship as the key to breaking American resistance. Perry had planned his attack with meticulous care, but the realities of naval warfare quickly disrupted his carefully laid strategies. The wind, which had been favorable to the Americans at dawn, began to shift, reducing their speed and making it difficult to close the distance with the British line. The Lawrence bore the brunt of the British assault, her hull shuddering under the impact of iron shot while her crew struggled to return fire. The roar of cannons became deafening as the battle intensified. Smoke filled the air, creating a fog of war that made it difficult for commanders to assess the situation. The Lawrence's deck ran red with blood as British cannonballs found their mark, killing and wounding sailors with horrific efficiency. Perry himself narrowly escaped death multiple times, his uniform torn by flying splinters and his face blackened by powder smoke. Captain Elliott's Niagara, positioned at the rear of the American line, struggled to engage the enemy effectively. The shifting winds and the complexity of naval maneuvering in line formation had left her unable to bring her guns to bear on the British vessels. This critical failure would later become a source of controversy, with some questioning whether Elliott had shown sufficient aggression in supporting Perry's flagship during the crucial early hours of the battle. The British gunners demonstrated their superior training and experience, their rate of fire consistently exceeding that of the American crews. The Detroit's experienced gunners worked with mechanical precision, loading and firing their cannons with deadly accuracy. The Queen Charlotte, under Captain Daniel Pring, provided devastating support, her broadsides tearing through the American line with professional efficiency. As the battle progressed, the Lawrence began to take on water from numerous hits below the waterline. Her masts were shot away, her rigging hung in tatters, and her deck was littered with the debris of war. Of her crew of 103 men, only 24 remained capable of fighting. The ship's surgeon worked frantically in the cramped quarters below deck, treating wounds that would have challenged the skills of physicians in the finest hospitals. Perry realized that his flagship was doomed, but his determination never wavered. In a moment that would become legendary in American naval history, he ordered his battle flag lowered and prepared to transfer to the Niagara. The famous banner bearing the words, "Don't give up the ship," would accompany him, a symbol of American resolve in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The transfer itself was an act of supreme courage. Perry and 4 volunteers climbed into a small boat and rowed across the battle-torn waters. While cannonballs splashed around them, British sharpshooters fired at the small craft, but somehow the Commodore and his men reached the Niagara unharmed. The sight of their commander's bravery inspired the American sailors, who cheered despite the desperate circumstances. Meanwhile, the British were experiencing their own challenges. Captain Barclay had been severely wounded by American fire, forcing him to relinquish command to his subordinates. The Detroit had also suffered significant damage, her hull pierced in multiple places and her crew depleted by American marksmanship. The Queen Charlotte, attempting to support the flagship, had become entangled with the Detroit, creating confusion in the British line. As reported by the Naval History and Heritage Command, the destruction of the British squadron on Lake Erie would reverse the course of the Northwest Campaign and force the British to abandon their positions, demonstrating how a single naval battle could determine the fate of an entire region. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the blood-soaked decks of both fleets. The air was thick with smoke, and the screams of wounded men. Surgeons worked without respite, their hands stained with the blood of boys who had sailed into battle that morning. With dreams of glory and home, the lake itself seemed to recoil from the violence, its once pristine waters now stained with the detritus of war. As Perry reached the Niagara, he quickly assessed the situation. The Lawrence was finished as a fighting vessel, but the battle was far from over. The British, despite their early success, were showing signs of fatigue and damage. Their precise formations were beginning to break down, and their rate of fire was decreasing. The moment for a decisive American counterattack was approaching, and Perry prepared to seize it with both hands. Aboard the Niagara, Commodore Perry took immediate command with the energy of a man who had stared death in the face and emerged undaunted. The fresh crew of the Niagara looked to their Commodore with a mixture of awe and determination, knowing that their leader had just performed one of the most courageous acts in naval history. Perry's uniform was torn and stained, his face marked by powder burns, but his eyes burned with an unquenchable fire. The British fleet, having expended enormous energy in their assault on the Lawrence, found themselves in an increasingly precarious position. The Detroit and Queen Charlotte had become entangled during the height of the battle, their crews struggling to separate the vessels while under continuous fire from the American fleet. Captain Barclay, bleeding from multiple wounds, attempted to maintain command despite his deteriorating condition, but the coordination that had marked the early British attack was beginning to falter. Perry immediately ordered the Niagara to break from the American line and sail directly through the British formation. This bold maneuver, known as crossing the T, would allow the American vessel to rake the British ships with devastating broadsides. While minimizing return fire, the tactic was dangerous, requiring the Niagara to sail through intense enemy fire. But Perry recognized that conventional naval warfare would not win this battle. The wind, which had been fickle throughout the morning, suddenly shifted in favor of the Americans. The Niagara caught the breeze and surged forward, her crew working with desperate efficiency to prepare for the climactic assault. Perry himself moved among the gun crews, inspiring them with his presence and ensuring that every shot would count. The battle flag of the Lawrence, now transferred to the Niagara, flew proudly above the charging vessel dot as the Niagara approached the British line. The tempo of the battle reached its crescendo. The American vessel's guns roared in sequence, each broadside tearing through the British formation with devastating effect. The Detroit, already damaged from her earlier engagement with the Lawrence, shuddered under the impact of the Niagara's assault. Her mainmast toppled, and her gun ports were smashed by the relentless American fire. The Queen Charlotte, attempting to support the Detroit, found herself caught in the crossfire. American shots from multiple vessels converged on the British ship, her crew falling under the withering assault. The smaller British vessels Hunter, Little Belt, and Chippewa tried to maintain their positions but were overwhelmed by the concentrated American attack. The tide of battle had turned decisively in favor of the young Republic. Captain Elliott, who had been criticized for his earlier performance, now fought with desperate courage aboard the smaller American vessels. The Caledonia, Ariel, and Somers pressed their attack with renewed vigor, their crews inspired by Perry's example. The American fleet, which had seemed on the verge of defeat just hours earlier, now fought with the coordination and determination of a veteran navy. The British position became increasingly untenable, with Captain Barclay severely wounded and communication between vessels breaking down. The British fleet began to lose its cohesion. The Detroit, her hull taking on water and her crew decimated, could no longer maintain effective fire. The Queen Charlotte, entangled and under assault from multiple directions, struggled to bring her guns to bear on the American vessels. Perry recognized that the moment for complete victory had arrived. He ordered the entire American fleet to concentrate their fire on the remaining British vessels, creating a devastating crossfire that no naval force could withstand. The Lawrence, though battered and barely afloat, managed to fire a few final shots at the enemy, her surviving crew determined to contribute to the American triumph. The sound of splintering wood and screaming metal filled the air as the British vessels began to surrender one by one. The Hunter, her colors shot away and her crew overwhelmed, was the first to strike her flag. The Little Belt and Chippewa followed, their commanders recognizing that continued resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties. The sight of British ships surrendering was unprecedented in naval warfare, marking the first time in history that an entire British squadron had been captured. As the afternoon wore on, the Detroit and Queen Charlotte, the pride of the British Great Lakes Fleet, also struck their colors. Captain Barclay, despite his wounds, maintained his dignity in defeat, formally surrendering his sword to Perry with the respect due between honorable naval officers. The American Commodore accepted the surrender with grace, recognizing the courage his opponents had shown throughout the battle. The victory was complete, But the cost had been terrible. The waters of Lake Erie were stained with blood, and the decks of both fleets were littered with the fallen. American casualties numbered 27 killed and 96 wounded, while the British lost 40 killed and 94 wounded. Each number represented not just a statistic, but a life cut short in the service of their respective nations. Perry immediately set about securing his prizes and caring for the wounded. The British officers were treated with the courtesy due to defeated enemies, while the wounded of both sides received medical attention without regard to nationality. The traditions of naval warfare demanded honor in victory, and Perry ensured that his triumph would be remembered as a testament to American courage, rather than cruelty. As the smoke cleared over Lake Erie, the magnitude of the American victory became apparent to all who witnessed it. The entire British squadron lay captured or destroyed, their proud flags replaced by the stars and stripes flying triumphantly in the afternoon breeze. Commodore Perry, his uniform torn and his face blackened by powder smoke, stood on the deck of the Niagara surveying the scene of his historic triumph. The young republic had achieved something that seemed impossible just hours earlier: the complete defeat of a British naval force. The immediate aftermath of the battle was chaotic yet purposeful. Perry's first concern was for the wounded, both American and British, who lay scattered across the blood-soaked decks of the various vessels. The ship's surgeons worked tirelessly, their skills tested by wounds that would have challenged the finest physicians in London or Philadelphia. The moans of the injured mingled with the creaking of damaged rigging and the lapping of waves against hull after hull pierced by enemy fire. Perry immediately dispatched boats to rescue survivors from the water and to secure the captured British vessels. The Detroit, once the pride of the British Great Lakes Fleet, was now a battered hulk, her mainmast gone and her gun ports smashed, yet she remained afloat, a testament to the skill of her builders and the determination of her crew. The Queen Charlotte, entangled with the Detroit during the height of the battle, showed similar damage but would live to sail under American colors. The Commodore's thoughts turned quickly to the strategic implications of his victory. Control of Lake Erie meant that American forces could now move freely across the lake, supplying their armies and threatening British positions throughout the region. The British fortress at Fort Malden, which had seemed impregnable with naval support, was now isolated and vulnerable. The entire British strategy for the Northwest Territory would have to be reconsidered. Perry's famous dispatch to General William Henry Harrison became one of the most celebrated messages in American military history. Finding a piece of paper aboard the Lawrence, he wrote in pencil, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop." The simplicity of the message belied the complexity of the achievement and the profound impact it would have on the war's outcome. The celebration among the American crews was subdued by the terrible cost of victory. The Lawrence, Perry's original flagship, was barely afloat, her deck a scene of devastation that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Of her crew of 103 men, only 24 remained uninjured. The ship that had borne the brunt of the British assault looked more like a floating wreck than a vessel of war. Yet from this scene of destruction emerged stories of heroism that would inspire generations of Americans. Sailors who had never been in battle before the morning had fought with the courage of veterans. Boys who had joined the Navy seeking adventure had proven themselves men in the crucible of combat. The diverse crew of the American fleet, drawn from farms and cities across the young republic, had demonstrated that citizen soldiers could match the professional warriors of the world's greatest naval power. The British prisoners, despite their defeat, were treated with the respect due to honorable enemies. Captain Barclay, despite his wounds, maintained his dignity in captivity, and Perry ensured that he and his officers received the medical attention they required. The wounded British sailors were cared for alongside their American counterparts, the brotherhood of the sea transcending national boundaries in the face of shared suffering. News of the victory spread rapidly across the United States, carried by fast riders and sailing vessels to every corner of the Republic. In Washington, President James Madison received word of Perry's triumph with profound relief, knowing that the victory had secured the northwestern frontier and provided a crucial boost to American morale. The news reached New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, where citizens celebrated in the streets and church bells rang in thanksgiving. According to contemporary accounts documented in the Proceedings of the United States Naval Institute, the victory made Perry a national hero overnight. Cities across the country honored him with parades and ceremonies, and Congress voted him a gold medal in recognition of his achievement. The battle had not only secured military objectives, but had also provided the young nation with a symbol of its growing strength and determination. The strategic consequences of the Battle of Lake Erie extended far beyond the immediate military situation. British forces throughout the Great Lakes region found themselves isolated and vulnerable, their supply lines severed and their naval support eliminated. The victory would force the British to abandon Fort Malden and retreat deeper into Canada, pursued by American forces who could now operate freely in the region. The psychological impact of the victory was equally significant. For the first time in the war, Americans had achieved a complete and unqualified victory over British forces. The myth of British invincibility on the water had been shattered by a young Commodore and his hastily assembled fleet. The victory demonstrated that American determination and courage could overcome even the most formidable opponents. The morning after the Battle of Lake Erie dawned clear and calm, a stark contrast to the previous day's thunder and carnage. Commodore Perry stood on the deck of his captured flagship, the Detroit, now flying American colors. As he surveyed the transformation that 24 hours had wrought, the British squadron that had controlled these waters for over a year now lay at anchor under American guard, their proud crews prisoners of war, their vessels prizes of a victory that would echo through the halls of history. The immediate strategic implications of Perry's triumph began to manifest within days of the battle. General William Henry Harrison, commanding American forces in the Northwest Territory, received Perry's famous dispatch with barely contained excitement. The naval victory had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the entire Great Lakes region, opening possibilities that had seemed impossible just days before. British forces at Fort Malden, under the command of General Henry Proctor, suddenly found themselves in an untenable position. The fort, which had seemed impregnable with British naval support, was now isolated and vulnerable. Supply lines that had sustained the garrison for months were severed, and the prospect of American forces crossing Lake Erie at will made the British position hopeless. Proctor had no choice but to begin planning an immediate evacuation. The British retreat from Fort Malden marked the beginning of a cascade of strategic reversals. Throughout the region, Native American allies under the leadership of the great Tecumseh, who had fought alongside the British in hope of preserving their ancestral lands, now faced the prospect of abandonment by their European allies. The delicate coalition that had threatened American settlements throughout the Northwest Territory began to crumble in the face of American naval supremacy. Perry wasted no time in exploiting his victory. Within weeks of the battle, American forces began crossing Lake Erie in strength, their passage protected by the very ships that had once threatened them. The Commodore personally supervised the transportation of Harrison's army, ensuring that the victory on the water would translate into success on land. The sight of American soldiers disembarking on Canadian soil, supported by the captured British fleet, demonstrated the complete reversal of fortune that Perry's victory had achieved. The pursuit of the retreating British forces led to the Battle of the Thames on October 5, 1813, less than a month after the naval victory. Harrison's army, now reinforced and resupplied thanks to American control of Lake Erie, caught up with Proctor's retreating forces and their Native American allies. The battle resulted in a decisive American victory, with Tecumseh killed in the fighting and British resistance in the Northwest Territory effectively ended. The psychological impact of the Lake Erie victory resonated throughout both the United States and the British Empire. In America, Perry became a national hero, his name synonymous with courage and determination. Cities across the Republic celebrated with parades and ceremonies, and Congress voted him a gold medal in recognition of his achievement. The victory provided a much-needed boost to American morale at a time when the war had produced few clear successes. In Britain, The news of the defeat was received with shock and disbelief. The Royal Navy, master of the seas for generations, had suffered its first complete squadron defeat in history. The Admiralty was forced to reassess its strategy for the Great Lakes, recognizing that American naval capability had reached a level that demanded serious respect. The defeat also had political implications, as critics of the war used the naval disaster to argue for peace negotiations. The economic consequences of the victory were equally significant. American merchants, who had been unable to trade freely in the Great Lakes region due to British naval dominance, now found new opportunities for commerce. The captured British vessels were incorporated into the American fleet, strengthening the young nation's naval capabilities. The victory also demonstrated American shipbuilding capacity, as Perry's fleet had been constructed in American yards using American materials and labor. The Battle of Lake Erie also had profound implications for the development of American naval tradition. The victory established precedents for aggressive leadership and tactical innovation that would influence American naval doctrine for generations. Perry's decision to transfer his flag under fire and his willingness to break from conventional tactics became models for future naval commanders. The battle demonstrated that American naval officers could match their British counterparts in courage and skill. The international implications of the victory extended beyond the immediate theater of war. European powers that had questioned American military capability were forced to reassess their opinions. The victory demonstrated that the young republic possessed not only the determination to fight, but also the skill to win against the world's most formidable naval power. This recognition would prove crucial in future diplomatic negotiations and international relations. The legacy of the Battle of Lake Erie would extend far beyond the War of 1812. The victory became a symbol of American determination and ingenuity, inspiring future generations of sailors and soldiers. The battle demonstrated that citizens fighting for their homeland could overcome professional warriors, a lesson that would resonate throughout American military history. Perry's triumph on Lake Erie proved that the young republic had the strength to defend its interests against any opponent. The weeks following the Battle of Lake Erie saw Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry transformed from a relatively unknown naval officer into one of the most celebrated heroes in American history. As news of his victory spread across the nation, carried by newspapers and word of mouth, the young Commodore found himself at the center of a national celebration that reflected the profound impact of his achievement on American morale and identity. The first major celebration took place in Erie, Pennsylvania, where Perry's fleet had been constructed during the difficult winter months preceding the battle. The citizens of Erie, who had witnessed the birth of the American Lake Erie Squadron, greeted their returning hero with overwhelming enthusiasm. The streets were decorated with banners and flags, and cannons fired salutes as Perry's carriage made its way through crowds of cheering citizens. The celebration lasted for days, with speeches, parades, and ceremonies honoring the man who had brought glory to their city. From Erie, Perry traveled to other major cities along the eastern seaboard, each stop generating similar outpourings of popular enthusiasm. In Philadelphia, one of the nation's largest cities, the celebration was particularly elaborate. The city's leaders organized a grand parade featuring military units, civic organizations, and thousands of citizens. Perry rode in an ornate carriage, drawn by white horses, his uniform decorated with the gold medal Congress had voted him in recognition of his achievement. The celebration in New York City surpassed even Philadelphia's elaborate festivities. The city's merchants, recognizing the economic benefits that would flow from American control of Lake Erie, spared no expense in honoring Perry. The harbor was filled with ships firing salutes, their masts decorated with flags and bunting. The city's finest hotel was reserved for Perry and his officers, and elaborate banquets were held in their honor. The victory had opened new avenues for trade and commerce, and the business community showed its appreciation accordingly. Boston, the cradle of the American Revolution, welcomed Perry with particular enthusiasm. The city's residents, many of whom had opposed the War of 1812, found themselves swept up in the national celebration. The victory on Lake Erie had demonstrated American capability in a way that even the war's critics could appreciate. Harvard College awarded Perry an honorary degree, and the city's most prominent citizens competed to entertain the naval hero. The celebrations were not limited to major cities. Small towns across the nation organized their own festivities, with local militia units parading and citizens gathering to hear speeches about the victory. Churches held special services, giving thanks for the triumph, and school children learned songs celebrating Perry's achievement. The victory had touched something deep in the American psyche, providing a symbol of national strength and determination that the young republic had desperately needed. Perry's personal response to the adulation was characteristically modest. In his speeches and public appearances, he consistently praised the courage of his sailors and officers, emphasizing that the victory had been achieved through collective effort, rather than individual heroism. He spoke movingly of the fallen, ensuring that their sacrifice was not forgotten in the celebration of victory. His gracious acceptance of praise while deflecting credit to others only enhanced his reputation and popularity. The political implications of Perry's celebrity were significant. The victory had provided the Madison administration with a much-needed success story, demonstrating that the war could be won and that American forces could match their British counterparts. Politicians of both parties sought to associate themselves with Perry's success, recognizing the political value of his popularity. The Commodore, however, remained focused on his naval duties and avoided partisan political activities. The cultural impact of the victory extended beyond immediate celebrations. Artists and writers began creating works inspired by Perry's achievement, with paintings, poems, and songs celebrating the Battle of Lake Erie. The image of Perry transferring his flag under fire became a popular subject for painters, symbolizing American courage and determination. The victory provided the young nation with a mythic narrative that would inspire future generations. The international reaction to Perry's celebrity was equally significant. European newspapers reported extensively on the American naval victory, with many expressing surprise at the capability demonstrated by the young republic's forces. British publications, while acknowledging the skill shown by Perry and his men, emphasized the unprecedented nature of the defeat and the courage shown by Captain Barclay and his crew. The victory had announced American naval capability to the world. The long-term impact of Perry's fame on American naval tradition was profound. The victory established precedents for aggressive leadership and tactical innovation that would influence American naval doctrine for generations. Future naval officers would study Perry's tactics and emulate his leadership style. The Battle of Lake Erie became a standard part of naval education, with its lessons taught at the Naval Academy and incorporated into official doctrine. The celebration of Perry's victory also reflected the broader development of American national identity. The young republic, still seeking to establish its place in the world, had found in Perry's triumph a symbol of its growing strength and capability. The victory demonstrated that Americans could succeed against the world's most powerful military forces, providing confidence that would prove crucial in future conflicts and international relations. The Battle of Lake Erie's significance extended far beyond the immediate military victory, weaving itself into the fabric of American history and establishing precedents that would influence naval warfare for generations to come. As the years passed following Perry's triumph on September 10, 1813, the battle's true historical importance became increasingly clear, transforming from a tactical victory into a strategic turning point that helped define the character of the young American Republic. The immediate aftermath of the battle had forced the British to abandon their entire strategy. For the Great Lakes region, the loss of naval control meant that Fort Malden became indefensible, forcing General Proctor to begin a hasty retreat that would ultimately lead to the Battle of the Thames and the death of Tecumseh. The British dream of creating a Native American buffer state in the Northwest Territory died with their naval supremacy on Lake Erie, opening vast territories to American settlement and development. The victory's impact on American naval doctrine was revolutionary. Perry's decision to abandon conventional line of battle tactics and sail directly through the British formation established a tradition of aggressive leadership that would characterize American naval warfare for decades. The concept of decisive action in the face of superior enemy forces became a cornerstone of American military thinking, influencing commanders from the Civil War through the Second World War. The battle also demonstrated the importance of naval construction and logistics in determining strategic outcomes. The American victory had been possible only because of the extraordinary efforts made to build and equip a fleet in the wilderness of Pennsylvania. The lessons learned from this experience would prove invaluable in future conflicts, establishing the principle that naval power required not just skilled officers and brave sailors, but also the industrial capacity to build and maintain effective fleets. The psychological impact of the victory on American national consciousness was equally profound. For the first time, Americans had achieved a complete and unqualified victory over British forces, demonstrating that the young republic could stand against the world's greatest military power. This confidence would prove crucial in subsequent diplomatic negotiations and would influence American foreign policy for generations to come. The Battle of Lake Erie also established important precedents for the treatment of prisoners of war and defeated enemies. Perry's respectful treatment of the captured British officers and sailors set a standard for military conduct that would influence American military tradition. The Commodore's gracious acceptance of Captain Barclay's surrender and his concern for the wounded of both sides demonstrated that victory could be achieved without sacrificing honor or humanity. The economic consequences of the victory rippled through American society for decades. Control of Lake Erie opened new avenues for trade and commerce, connecting the growing cities of the East with the vast resources of the West. The Great Lakes became a highway for American expansion, with cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago growing rapidly as a result of the commercial opportunities created by American naval supremacy. The educational legacy of the battle was equally significant. The victory became a standard part of American military education, with its tactical lessons studied at West Point and the Naval Academy. Perry's innovative tactics were analyzed and refined, contributing to the development of American military doctrine. The battle demonstrated that American officers could match their European counterparts in tactical skill and strategic thinking. The international implications of the victory continued to resonate long after the war ended. European powers that had questioned American military capability were forced to reassess their opinions, recognizing that the young republic possessed both the determination and skill to defend its interests. This recognition would prove crucial in future diplomatic negotiations and would help establish America's position as a rising power on the world stage. The Battle of Lake Erie also had profound implications for the development of American naval tradition and culture. The victory established the principle that American naval officers should be aggressive, innovative, and willing to take risks to achieve victory. This tradition would influence American naval operations in conflicts from the Mexican-American War through the present day, creating a distinctive American approach to naval warfare. The legacy of the battle extended beyond purely military considerations to influence American literature, art, and popular culture. The image of Perry transferring his flag under fire became one of the most iconic scenes in American military history, inspiring countless paintings, poems, and stories. The victory provided the young nation with a heroic narrative that would inspire future generations of Americans. The strategic lessons of the Battle of Lake Erie continued to influence American military thinking well into the 20th century. The demonstration that control of waterways could determine the outcome of entire campaigns would prove relevant in conflicts from the Civil War's control of the Mississippi River to the Pacific campaigns of World War II. The principle that naval power required not just ships and sailors, but also the industrial capacity to build and maintain fleets would prove crucial in America's rise to global power. As America commemorated the centennial and bicentennial of the Battle of Lake Erie, the victory's significance only seemed to grow. The battle had demonstrated that a young democracy could produce leaders of exceptional courage and skill, that American industrial capacity could match that of established powers, and that the nation possessed the determination to defend its interests against any opponent. Perry's triumph on Lake Erie had proven that the American experiment in self-government possessed the strength to survive and prosper in a hostile world. The Battle of Lake Erie thus stands as more than just a naval victory. It represents a crucial moment in the development of American national character and military tradition. The courage shown by Perry and his men, the innovative tactics that achieved victory, and the gracious treatment of defeated enemies established precedents that would influence American military conduct for generations. The victory on the waters of Lake Erie had proved that the young republic possessed not just the will to fight for its independence, but also the skill and determination to win.